Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. And thank you so much for coming to rejoin us here on another edition of our becoming fan favorite, I don't know, fan favorite, but at least internal favorite, That's So Poetic, a tour we've done every April for the last few years, virtually, bringing a group of guides together or a gathering of guides or a gaggle of guides. I don't know what the term is when it comes to guides, a murder of guides, a storm of guides, a Game of Thrones. But at any rate, we really enjoy this because it's a chance for a whole group of people to come in. And as many of us get very busy with our personal lives and families and whatnot, being able to come and put together just a quick 3-minute presentation is less of a load than some of our other virtual tours that we've done and our other broadcast tours where, two or three of us are, spending several weeks trying to put together all the research and whatnot. And I really like it because it takes the workload off of me because I can put that all on the other guides and make them do all the work. And I can just get up here and talk and hopefully not ruin the whole show for everybody else. So I appreciate your patience on all of that. A quick bit of news. We are almost fully back to weekly tours of the Greenwich Village pub crawl and our Brooklyn tour. We survived the pandemic, which was rough, but what was rougher was the pandemic of gentrification, which unfortunately has left a very ugly thumb, especially in the village, which has already been dealing with this and has technically been a trend in the village for about 150 years. So it's not anything new. It just feels a little bit more dramatic when you're dealing with it personally. But we have found a bit of a new route. We're very excited about what we've put together. We're introducing a new bar with some new authors that we're excited to talk about. We're going to pop into some places we haven't gone to in a lot of years. And hopefully once we get a greater gathering of a gaggle of guides together to get on the tours, you'll start seeing us up weekly. So keep your eyes open for that. And we hope we can see you all in person. But I do greatly enjoy these live broadcast tours that we do because it allows us an opportunity to go beyond just how far a person can walk. And it gives us a chance to really kind of get into more detail on a lot of other elements of some of the writers and locations that you're very limited to. And again, like I said, how many blocks can everyone go before they get tired of walking and listening to you talk? And this way, if you get bored, you can always go back and find our video again, which is on YouTube. And we're testing out for the second time, actually going live stream on YouTube. So I can actually see it over here in a slight delay, and it's very unnerving to see myself over there on another computer. But enough about me. We're really excited to go through. We have a great collection of poets. Some you may be familiar with, some you may not. And I wanted to kind of have the rest of the team kind of turn your cameras on here so you can see who we've got gathered today with Danielle, Marissa, Miranda, and Rachel. I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to Rebecca Ross Bailey and Rose Merritt, neither of whom could make it here this evening, but they've been really helping keeping this tour together and the company together through some of these tumultuous times. Their work may not be seen, but it is certainly noticed, and it's noticed by us. And then additionally, Danielle, who took a sabbatical for a while. It was a paid sabbatical, or at least in the sense that she got paid the exact same amount as she was paid prior to her sabbatical. So her rate did not change during her time off, but she came back. And quite honestly, I don't know if tonight's tour would have fully happened if she hadn't been staying on top of it. So she came back in the right time. And I think we're really happy to have you back, Danielle. Thank you very much. I will introduce each of them individually when we get to their specific segments to kind of keep things moving. I will say that this will be Danielle's first time running the PowerPoint and talking at some point. So give some positive love and some vibes for that, because I know what it's like. It's very nerve-wracking to have to do that at the same time as talking, and you're worried about making a mistake. However, this is a virtual literary pub crawl. There are no mistakes. And if anything goes wrong, it's probably my fault on what I put in the script. So blame me. And thank you, Danielle, for diving in onto that. The last thing for those of you who may not remember, but the snapping that you'll probably see us do is a bit of a Greenwich Village literary tradition, dates back to the Gaslight Cafe of some of the beat writers. And the story goes that the Gaslight actually features in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. For any of you who've seen that show, that is the club that she was performing at. It was a real club on McDougal Street. And it said that the neighborhood would complain about the raucous noise and drunken libations and cheers that were going on at the different clubs. And so they decided at the end of every good poetry reading to snap instead to kind of keep the volume down. How true that is, we don't know, but it is a tradition that we carry on to this day. So that being said, I would love to kick off our first presenter, who's coming to us from 100 years ago, clearly, as we see her black and white camera and her clothing and style. Miranda and I have known each other for many years now. 2007? Is it that far back? Maybe. I met her when she was slinging a fairly heavy piece of metal at my head, because we were both taking stage combat together. And a friendship struck up, and she heard about this tour, and of course she wanted to get involved right away, and has been a strong member ever since. She worked for the Museum of Sex for a while, and then now she works for the Brooklyn Academy of Music. No,
The Brooklyn Conservatory of Music.
Brooklyn Conservatory of Music, right? BCM, not the BAM. She works for the BCM and helps run some of their events department there. She's quite honestly like such a warm, loving, and kind human being. There's not many that are of that caliber. So I hope you get a chance to strike up a friendship with her if you ever get to meet her, because she is truly a gem amongst many. And she's also a parent, but please don't judge her parenting styles when you find out who she has chosen for her poets. She'll be presenting two, and the first, I believe, was sort of a favorite of mine from Maine, Edward Gorey.
So thank you so much. I mean, I know that you start off with being so sweet and such a gem, and here I am about to show sort of really dark material. I'm presenting two of my favorite sort of dark children's poets. Do not read into any of this my feelings about any of my tantruming 5-year-old at any time. There's a strange occurrence when you look at children writers that there's a large number of single non-parent males who like to write dark humor for and about children. You get J.M. Barrie, Ronald Searle, Roald Dahl, of course. And the two I'm talking about today is Edward Gorey and Shel Silverstein. So to start with Edward Gorey, the first book I ever got actually was an Edward Gorey pop-up book, and I actually still have it. It's right here. And this book is called The Dwindling Party. It was actually given to my mother at a baby shower for me. This was decided that this was the right book for a baby shower. And it's all about a family going through a garden, and as they go through, more and more people start disappearing. So they get pulled off and away, and until at last there's only one little boy at the end leaving the garden. I blame this book for all of my dark humor for the rest of my life. So it's all because of that. Edward Gorey himself was actually born in 1925, so I'm a little older than look for that, but we'll explain a little bit that too. He lived in New York City for most of his adult life, but then moved to Cape Cod in 1979, where he really sort of took on his real life if he wanted, with sort of a hermit there with friends and cats only. His friends said that he looked like a cross between Hemingway and Santa Claus. He had a shifting wardrobe of at least a dozen fur coats. Some of them dyed electric colors like blue, green, yellow. And underneath it, he tended to wear a turtleneck adorned with some sort of necklace like African beads or lavalier on a string. And he often sported half a dozen rings, as you can see in that middle photo. The outfit, of course, would be completed with blue jeans and classic kegs because, you know, we still believe in comfort as well. Edward Gorey is most famous for his drawing of the opening of every PBS mystery series. So you'll see here, this is the video from that beginning of that mystery series. I imagine everyone has watched at least something from here. This is all done by Edward Gorey. His style of drawing was seen as macabre Victorian Edwardian overlays. So this is why this sort of look that I have matches very strongly everything he generally has done in style-wise. He has a very strong influence, therefore, on a lot of newer Gothic writers and artists, including Neil Gaiman, Lemony Snicket of A Series of Unfortunate Events, Tim Burton, of course. And in fact, Sue Grafton also mentioned Edward Gorey as her inspiration for the titles of her books. A is for Alibi and Onward and Onward, if you've ever read those. Most of Edward Gorey's poems and art were designed as if they were for children. Yet he never, as I said, had children, cared for any children, didn't really interact or like children themselves very much. Um, but Maurice Sendak, who was a friend of his, also once remarked, Ted Gorey is perfect for children. And that's the saddest thing of all, that Gorey books weren't allowed to be published that way. They have a very interesting mix of whether or not they're designed for children, but a little bit too dark for children. The Ghastly Crumb Tinies is one of my favorite books from this poem. He wrote this in 1963 and said he was inspired by those 19th century cautionary tales for children. I will let you decide as we read it, whether or not this should be counted as a bedtime story for children or not. A is for Amy, who fell down the stairs. B is for Basil, assaulted by bears. C is for Clara, who wasted away. D is for Desmond, thrown out of a sleigh. E is for Ernest, who choked on a peach. F is for Fanny, sucked dry by a leech. G is for George, smothered under a rug. H is for Hector, done in by a thug. I is for Ida, who drowned in the lake. J is for James, who took a lie by mistake. K is for Kate, who was struck with an axe. L is for Leo, who swallowed some tacks. M is for Maud, who was swept out to sea. N is for Neville, who died of ennui. O is for Olive, run through with an awl. P is for Prue, trembled flat in a brawl. Q is for Quentin, who sunk in a mire. R is for Rhoda, consumed by fire. S is for Susan, who perished of fits. T is for Titus, who flew into bits. U is for Una, who slipped down the drain. V is for Victor, squashed under a train. W is for Winnie, embedded in ice. X is for Xerxes, devoured by mice. Y is for Yorick, whose head was knocked in. And Z is for Zilla, who drank too much gin.
Cheers to the too much gin. Snap, 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 snap. You know, it's really funny that this is such like childhood for me. I remember watching the Mystery Show with my parents and just being fascinated by that opening cartoon every single time. And I think I read somewhere that I believe his first display of his art publicly might have happened in Maine, in Portland, Maine. So there's always been a little, I think when people try to, you know, clamp onto him a little bit more than is probably fair up there, but he definitely is a well-known figure. I will say, and I know we talked about this yesterday, and I kind of wanted to hit him on this, that like when you read this yesterday in rehearsal, I kind of struggled back and forth with the funny, the humor, the dark humor, the art, but also like how so much of my view on bad things happening to kids changed when I had a kid, and when it became so much more real, that it would like, you know, and I think we were saying like how thankful I am that our kids are living in the time they're living in now versus 100 or 200, 300 years ago, because it seems like often there was unpleasantness targeted at kids. But, you know, when you think about it in the perspective of those cautionary tales, it feels a lot more fitting. But like, that was really something I struggled with is like, it's funny, but it's also like, it's kids and I have kids and I don't want them to die of ennui.
What's also very strange is like when you think about these books, and then, you know, I first read this, I think when I was 6, 7, 8, and I thought it was hilarious. I had no fear of this. I thought it was the first poem I've ever memorized in my life. At that age, I dressed up as Z is for Zilla, who drank too much gin for Halloween one year. I had the T is for Titus, who flew into bits, as my image for my thank you cards for my wedding, because it's a picture of him about to open a present. Like, it had been this such an important thing in my life on that. I actually went to his house a few times in Cape Cod. I recommend highly. There's a lot of fun things, including they have an exhibition about this where they have like little dolls or styles of each kid. And so one of the things to do when I went up there recently with my at that point 4-year-old was to run around with a piece of paper going, I found Zilla. Here she is drinking gin, and it's a fun scavenger hunt of find the child who's about to die or is dead, and it's a weird thing of like children find this hilarious. There's no like they don't have that same fear of, oh, actually this is now death. There's a fun thing with that.
I definitely read these books as a kid too. And I remember very vividly, my big thing was that was where I learned what ennui was. And that's also where I learned what an all was, because otherwise, how are you going to do stuff? So Gory is the one to teach it to you.
And ennui is the best one. You have to say, like, poor Neville. Neville is my favorite. Neville's been my favorite before any Harry Potter stuff and all that because of Edward Gorey and ennui.
There's a play that's called Gory Stories, and I forget how involved he was with making the play versus if it's something that people took his work and turned into it. Although, I mean, it wouldn't really be in the public domain, so he must have had some involvement with it. And it was a grad student from the University of Maine, Billy Mitchell, who had directed that. And it's probably one of the best shows that had happened in my time in college up there. It just like it was the right cast, the right costuming, the right sense and tone and playfulness. And like for some of the actors who were on there, it was the best performance I'd seen them pull out. And it's a wonderful play. And I've often wanted to direct it again. The problem is, how do you direct it when you've seen another version? How do you not pull from that? I think it makes it hard sometimes that you're almost like it's taken away because it was so good that all I'm going to do is try to recreate it and put my name on it.
He also is most famous for he actually, I think, won a Tony Award for it for his Dracula on Broadway. He designed all of the sets and costumes for a Broadway version of Dracula. And that was so popular that literally I have like a sort of children's toy of it, where it's think of it like sort of paper games. You have, your all the stage parts, you have all the people you can pop out and move around, because, it was so popular and so amazing that people loved it and wanted it for their children. Again, this weird between of, and like some of his stuff is weirdly very naughty. Like it has a lot of sexuality in some of the things too, while also never actually showing anything too much. And so I'm always balancing like which of the books I find, and I'm like, all right, you can read this one to my kid. This one you shouldn't read right now, type of thing.
Well, and I like that because I think that's a nice segue. The naughty is a nice segue to get into the next one that you were going to present, another childhood favorite of mine. And I'll let you take it away from here.
All right. I will at least sort of take off some of the outfit, and maybe I don't know if I can change my settings back to
you're gonna join us into the present. Color. Look at
that. Yep.
Wow.
I'm normally this black and white. It's just what I'm like. So my second writer, poet again, is another one where, I blame my 5-year-old as I started to look at what poetry I've been wanting to read, what I've been thinking about. And that one is Shel Silverstein. And so I really rediscovered Shel Silverstein's poems, looking at my old child books from these ones and remembering as a child, I really focused on his drawings that were so weird and fun and silly. But now as a parent, looking at the words again, it's actually surprised at how well he understood kids. Again, single male with no kids ever. Somehow really sort of got kids and their styles and their thoughts. And one particular poem I have from Where the Sidewalk Ends really is a progressive in its teaching. And it's called Don't Tell Me. Please don't tell me I should hug. Don't tell me I should care. Don't tell me just how grand I'd feel if I just learned to share. Don't say, it's all right to cry. Be kind, be fair. Be true. Just let me see you do it. Then I just might do it too. Something we always try to teach, and something really for teaching for parents as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Shel Silverstein, of course, is most known for his children's books, The Giving Tree, and his poetry, Where the Sidewalk Ends and A Light in the Attic. But as an adult, I discovered that his other major writing sources, actually while being cataloging old Playboys at the Museum of Sex. So Here we see one of his drawings and writings there. So Shell met Hugh Hefner because both of them were actually soldiers in the Korean War, and both of them helped draw cartoons for the Army journal Pacific Stars and Stripes. He became a regular correspondent for Playboy, where he would draw and write comics based on his travels all around the world, including one time he actually wrote about his home, Greenwich Village. So you can see here the sort of map that he talked about of the village when he was there. In it, it was written, "A whole new philosophy called beat blossomed forth in America. While he was away, it took root in the village. On these pages, Shell depicts this town within a town in all its beat and body glory." You can see a mix of great photos, drawings, artists. I've always been trying to find out which bar this one is. It doesn't list it, but I have a feeling I've been there. So
it does feel familiar. There's something about the chandelier that's so distinguished. Yeah.
It does look familiar. I agree.
Now, Hugh told him that he was actually required to have photos as well as drawings in his travels. He could not just do drawings, and the photos required to have him included in these photos. One of my favorite quotes was from a reader who highly enjoyed one of Shell's pictures. I warn you that this quote may ruin some of your childhood. "As a wife for 19 years with a 17-year-old son, I have been enjoying your magazine for some time. At last you have thought of us old, poor housefraus, and given us the symbol of manhood, and I might add virtue, in the person of Shel Silverstein. I could not sleep for thinking of that magnificent hunk of manhood. The exquisite beauty of his face and form, especially the rear view, has overwhelmed me. I feel tingly and giddy lightheadedness. Miss Lee Ackman, Brooklyn, New York, 1960.
I want to find my quest now is to find Mrs. Lee Ackerman of Brooklyn from 1960. I want to meet this woman.
I feel so bad for her 17-year-old son. He's probably just going like, why, Mom? Why did you give a full name? Why did you mention me? What are you doing?
She's living her best life. That's what.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Live for today.
I mean, look at that picture, especially, that's a good picture.
Great picture.
That's really the way you're supposed to play shuffleboard, really. Everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. Original rules. That goes back to the formation of the game, right?
Mm-hmm. So on that note, I want to end with one of my favorite Shel Silverstein poems, which is one of the sweetest poems I've ever really heard. And it's called Hug of War. I will not play at tug of war. I'd rather play at hug of war, where everyone hugs instead of tugs, where everyone giggles and rolls in the rug, where everyone kisses and everyone grins, and everyone cuddles and everyone wins.
That's nice. It is sweet. And again, so much of my childhood story, I come back to Shel Silverstein to me is like the house in Rockland that I grew up in, and those poems. And actually those actual copies of the books my parents gave to me, and my kids loved them for a while. And it was the same thing like you were saying, Miranda, we'd nighttime, they could pick out a certain number of poems. I actually loved it because it shortened our bedtime process, because reading poems is quicker than reading books. But they'd flip through and they'd look for pictures, and I want that poem, and I want this poem. It's really interesting that was also sort of your experience. And yeah, I gotta wonder how many other people are kind of just the amount of sexual attraction to Shel Silverstein is not something I ever expected to learn about when I got into doing a tour or something like this. Definitely a unique twist, but it seems like there used to be a time where poetry was sexy and poets were sexy, and it was they were up on stage and they were followed by thousands of people, and they were celebrities, they were icons, and I feel like I'm who am I? I'm just some guy with a beard in the basement, but I feel like the poetry's kind of lost a little bit of that, and it's really sort of become very insular. And so much of poetry is for the poets and for the educated, and I feel like we lose when it used to be really it was key to the masses, and part of that is just when we were a better read culture, 100 years ago, that everyone read. And I feel like there was poetry that was written that just kind of that quotable line, that grasping at something that was inspirational, where it feels like a lot of the modern poetry I've read, and I have not read a lot, so I'm really not an expert, but it feels so very personal. I feel like that's been the trend, is like your own experiences, your own emotions and feelings, which have, your feelings have value and I respect them. But it's not as easy to kind of pull out a quote and put that on a poster somewhere and look to that every day, certainly not my poetry.
We need to work on writing more about dead children. I mean, that's obviously what's, missing.
I think that's what it is. I think that's what it is. But yeah, Shell has a number of ones that kind of hit you right in there. So moving on to our next presenter, Danielle, this is going to be the trial by fire, reading and clicking at the same time, being aware of the camera, being aware of the microphone, not wanting to click too early, not wanting to click too late.
Man, the pressure.
How are you able to track? Because I work like with just the number of screens and stuff that I have going on to try to follow along with the script and be aware of the Zoom. Like, what's your secret? Just staying on top.
My secret is some vodka in this literary pub crawl shot glass. Cheers.
I like it. Cheers. Good way to keep the nerves down. I will say, for those of you who aren't familiar, actually, I met Danielle through Miranda. She was sort of the connecting introduction, and very quickly became a real fun guide. Although I remember Miranda, I think it was, Danielle, I think it was too many M's.
That's why I'm here.
The British one, Miranda, Danielle. So I think Danielle, was it you when we were working on the Times Square tour? And you kind of complained like, I don't know who any of these people are. This is not for millennials. This is like, because it was all like 1920s artists and actors. Was that you who told me I needed to kind of make it more approachable?
No, but that person sounds maybe correct. Kidding. Go on the Times Square tour. It's lots
of fun. If we can get it back up and going again, I got to get the Village and Brooklyn back. But Danielle has done a lot with wellness and fortune telling. I think she's very connected to the spirituality. In fact, I've told the story many times and I still love telling it. But one of the early times when we were interviewing Danielle to be a guide, and we were doing it virtually at that time, because Justin and I were in different places. And Justin's at his house on the computer. I'm on mine, and Danielle's in her apartment. And she would start talking and answer a question. And then I'd start asking another question, and she'd be like, uh-huh. And then she'd come back to us, and like, this just kept going on, where she'd kind of be doing this. And it was getting really weird. And then at one point she was like, do you hear that? No, we don't hear this. It's like, oh, okay. I'm sure it's nothing. And then she like looks back, she starts talking, and the lights go out. It goes pitch black. and she's like, I'm going to go check on what's going on in the power. And Justin and I are like, do we need to, are we about to watch like a murder unfold? Is this like, what's going on? Like, do we need to call the cops? And, just if something was happening that I think I don't think I ever knew what the noise was, but a breaker just blew.
I guess I like to say it's the spirits pushing you to hire me. Make the right choice.
Make the right choice. I believe that what it was, but she, what did you say here? We only hired you out of fear that we would be hunted by the spirits that she commands. And I think that story is exactly what it is. But she's in process right now to training to be an MBSR teacher. What is that?
It's a very fancy meditation teacher, one that's backed by many, many studies, medical studies dating back to the 1970s on how meditation can help you with a myriad of diseases and treating them. So if you don't meditate, send me an email.
And why don't you? So you I guess in the mention of beats, because Miranda's mentioned beats with the Shel Silverstein, I think you're starting that to carry that theme forward. Yeah.
Yes, I am. So I'm going to get us back to this beautiful presentation. So today I'm going to talk about Bob Kaufman, who is a beat poet and is also was in New York for some time. Bob Kaufman was born on April 18th, 1925 in New Orleans, Louisiana, and he died in 1986 in San Francisco, California. This is only of importance because we are both Aries Taurus cusp babies and we share similar birthdays, which were just last week. So happy birthday to us both. Cheers.
Happy birthday. Finally 21.
Yes, finally legal to drink on this tour. Bob was a surrealist. He was noted for his Dada-esque poems, and he's also considered a jazz poet. He had a lot of experience as a jazz performance artist, and you can really tell in his poetry how he works with syncopation and meter, how he was influenced by that. He was the type of poet who preferred that you read his poetry aloud versus reading it quietly to yourself. And he often expressed this desire to be forgotten, both as a poet and as a person. Most of his poems he didn't even write down himself, he just spoke them. And we only have them today because his wife, Eileen, really took care in recording all of them and preserving them and sharing them. In 1960, he moved to New York, and he spent a lot of time at the New School with the New School movement poets. And he also spent a lot of time circling back to the Gaslight Cafe, as we talked about in the beginning of our tour, where people snap at the end, and he performed there. There's a rumor that we'll say is allegedly, but I find very credible, that he lived in the same exact building as Allen Ginsberg, and it was there where he met Timothy Leary and Jack Kerouac, and they spent a lot of time dabbling in psilocybin together, just living that beat life. In 1961, he was nominated for England's Guinness Poetry Award, but he lost out to T.S. Eliot, which is a pretty high honor, especially for a poet in the movement in the time period. A lot of the times when we talk about the Beats or poets of the past, they weren't very famous during their lifetime, and they didn't often see many accolades. But you see that with, Jack Kerouac, and now we see that with Bob Kaufman. So there are similar parallels. But he lived a very difficult life. He struggled immensely with mental illness. He was institutionalized. He was arrested multiple times. I think it was in San Francisco, he was arrested almost 40 times for disorderly conduct. So there was a lot of struggle in his life. And the thing with his poetry is he does reflect on that a lot and immortality. But he also really lends a real critical view to it with a hint of humor, which you'll see in a moment. And then after the assassination of JFK, he was extremely moved by this, and he decided to really lean on his Buddhist faith and take a vow of silence for almost a decade. His next live performance was thought not to be until 1981 in San Francisco, when he read another work of poetry, which is pretty incredible when you consider that he passed in 1986, that the last 5 years of life he was speaking after taking this huge vow of silence. So the poem that I want to share with you today does utilize the sardonic tone, and it really deconstructs sort of the prevailing cultural assumptions of the beat movement of that time, specifically the us versus them paradigm. The other thing I want to mention is here he is pictured with Gregory Corso, who is another famous beat poet, which if you come join us live in person on our Greenwich Village Literary Pub Crawl Tour, you can learn more about. Shameless plug. So the poem I'm going to share with you today is the Abomunist Manifesto, which sounds awfully like the Communist Manifesto. And it was first published serially in John Kelly's Glad magazine called Beatitude in 1959. And it proclaimed itself to be the first and last word from the abominable snowmen of modern poetry. So here we go. Abomunists join nothing but their hands and legs, or other same. Abomunists spit anti-poetry for poetic reasons and frink. In times of abomunists do not look at pictures painted by presidents and unemployed prime ministers. In times of national peril, abomunists, as reality Americans, stand ready to drink themselves to death for their country. Abomunists do not feel pain, no matter how much it hurts. Abomunists do not use the word square, except when talking to squares. Abomunists read newspapers only to ascertain their abominability. Abomunists never carry more than $50 in debts on them. Abomunists believe that the solution to problems of religious bigotry is to have a Catholic candidate for president and a Protestant candidate for pope. Abomunists do not write for money. They write the money itself. Abomunists believe only what they dream, only after it comes true. Abomunist children must be reared abominably. Abomunist poets, confident that the new literary form, footprintism, has freed the artist of outmoded restrictions, such as the ability to read and write, or the desire to communicate, must be prepared to read their works at dental colleges, embalming schools, homes for unwed mothers, homes for wed mothers, insane asylums, sane asylums, USO canteens, kindergartens, and county jails. Abomunists never compromise their rejectionary philosophy. Abomunists reject everything except snowmen. And I have my little snowman here with me.
Oh, well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Set the bar with presentations on that one.
Worked hard on this presentation.
It might be the one and only time I've ever been featured on a slide at the same time as Bob Kaufman. I feel like I can say with confidence, but it's never happened in any other scenario whatsoever. What? So, I mean, where did you? Because Bob Kaufman's another one. Like I think I'd heard the name around, but I've certainly never read any of his poetry. Like where did you come across him?
I came across him because when I first joined the literary pub crawl, I thought that I knew everything there was to know about New York writers. And then as I started going through the script and reading some of the stories and going on tour, a lot of, we have so much research that a lot of our tour guides like to throw in old versions of the script or like little stories that like I never heard of and didn't have any access to that information. And I was like, what is this? I cannot be a tour guide unless I am the most educated. So I just started learning a lot about beat poets since that was our biggest bar, Kettle of Fish. We used to spend the most amount of time there. And that was the least amount of information I had besides like Jack Kerouac. So I really did a deep dive. And when I read his poems, I really appreciated them because they are pretty humorous. And I feel like especially in times like now where we're in such a highly politicized culture and we look towards the 60s and the beat movements, which in so many ways reflects the times we're living in now, I think it's really interesting to see this poem talking about the movement and its importance, but also being tongue in cheek about it. And I feel like that's important to just kind of have a breath.
Yeah, no, I agree. And sometimes you make more points with humor than you do, directly to it. And I think that, the number of times you watch, you see something that's really comedic. I mean, some of our satirical newscasters are, they get their point across more than others sometimes. And it is that entertainment. And I think it's compared to the sort of really the art of theater where, if I tell you how you should behave, you might get defensive, you might react if I start criticizing your thought process. But when you show somebody and I'm a neutral observer and maybe people aren't even aware that I'm observing, I might, that empathy might come back out, that I might be more connected because when I see somebody else going through something, I'm more likely to start feel for them versus if somebody tells me like, you should think this and you should think that versus seeing it situationally. I think I remember, actually my mother, who I think is watching this, but she came and saw a play with the character I was playing who was going to get put to death. And there was this whole monologue after. And she told me afterwards, she's like, yeah, I've always been kind of a supporter of capital punishment until I saw this play. And now, it kind of made me think about it in a different way. And it did kind of click with me that it gives you an opportunity to see a different slice of life without actually being preached to. And humor is very freeing because laughing lets your guard down more, versus coming in so heavy handed, and you see it all the time. We see it online and we see it everywhere else where, it just becomes this clash, but a little bit of humor lessens the guard down, and then you start having a conversation instead of an argument. And conversations, is really what starts to bring people together. So that's my soapbox. It was a shorter soapbox than the last time. I think last time I had a huge one. So,
I like your.
But that being said, I wanted to continue some of the beat briefly because and to the Kettle of Fish because a poet that I've learned more about from doing on the tour was Mary Baraka. I still have I've done this poem several times. So some of you, even some of the viewers here may have seen me do this one again, but I do really love this particular poem. But Amiri Baraka, I think, like Bob Kaufman and many others, was sort of a one of the fringe beat writers that often kind of gets lost behind the real powerhouse four that everyone knows. Gregory Corso, Jack Kerouac, Burroughs, and Ginsberg. So, learning a little bit more about him and his connections with some of the bars. Because again, initially you're looking for, well, who went here that we can talk about? And like, oh, who is this guy? And he's very interesting. And in fact, one of his big claims to fame was his friendship with Howe and Ginsberg. Really, I guess with Ginsberg because of Howe, not really a friendship with the poem per se. I guess you could be a friend with the poem. And it depends on how you connect with it, right? There's a metaphor in there somewhere if I was more eloquent. But he, when he first kind of got into it, he wrote an essay. One of his first published pieces was in defense of beat poetry and sort of the beat philosophy at the time, which was certainly getting mocked by a lot of outside of the beat world. But he was right. He wrote, "Young writers must resort to violence in literature to shake us out of the woeful literary sterility which characterized the 40s. So I think for them, and like we've seen in other movements, it was sort of a rebellion off of the morals of the older generation. We have to make our own mark, so to speak. But the apocryphal story goes is that when he read Howe, he was quite impressed by it, and that he wrote to Allen Ginsberg, and allegedly he wrote on, some say toilet stationery, some say on an actual piece of toilet paper or a toilet paper roll. We found, I believe this is an actual shot of the roll that he wrote, where he wrote on this and basically to Allen Ginsberg and said, "Are you for real?" To which Ginsberg apparently said something along the lines of yes. And sort of a friendship evolved. Ginsberg really helped kind of bring him into the beat fold, so to speak. And they had a sort of a professional friendship that was quite vital, I think, for the whole scene and for each other, and especially for Baraka, to really kind of get more legitimized in that scene. He eventually would run several different publications. Like I mentioned, his first essay, I think, was in a self-published collection. He worked with several different, what when I was in college, we'd call zines. It was a sort of a similar style, this sort of a very village institution of the self-published literary, artistic, and philosophical paper. And one of them was one that he started with poet Diane de Prima, another sort of fringe beat poet. They wrote The Floating Bear. This is the only cover I've been able to find, their Christmas edition of The Floating Bear. But they ran that together, and they ended up having an affair together for a while, and I believe they even had a child together. The Floating Bear was a little fiery, so much so that the government was trying to shut it down. It's the 60s, anti-war, all the stuff was going on. Doesn't make the government happy at that time. But this whole pesky first free speech amendment kind of gets in the way a lot of times on what you can do. But what they could do was constantly sue them and force them to have to pay all these legal fees, hire lawyers, and basically kind of bankrupt them. And so that's how they managed to shut down the Floating Bear. But these two beat poet outliers certainly left their mark on the world. And I think Baraka might actually be the only American poet to be put in jail because of a poem. So there was riots in 1967, and he ended up getting arrested on a charge of possessing an illegal firearm. I don't think that phrase exists anymore. Sorry. But it was the riots in Newark. And then when he went up to be arraigned, after he'd been beaten very heavily while he was being arrested, the judge read out one of his other poems, a line from one of his other poems. And he read it aloud in the courtroom. And the line was, "All the stores will open for you if you say the magic words. And the magic words are, up against the wall, mother effer, this is a stick-up." And the judge decided that he didn't really care for that particular line and sentenced him to 3 years in prison, which was luckily sort of overturned upon appeal. The poem that I picked that I truly love is from his collection called Preface from a 20-volume Suicide Note, back when he went by the name of Leroy Jones, which was his birth name was Everett Leroy Jones. He eventually at one point changed it to Amir Baraka, and then later it became Amiri Baraka, as we know now. And this is a poem I really enjoy because it's what I like to call like a beautiful sadness. It's an eloquence to it. It has a little sadness to it, but there's a beauty that's underneath this sadness. And it goes, Lately, I've become accustomed to the way the ground opens up and envelops me each time I go out to walk the dog, or the broad-edged, silly music the wind makes when I run to catch the bus. Things have come to that. And now each night I count the stars, and each night I get the same number. And when the stars will not come out to be counted, I count the holes they leave. Nobody sings anymore. And then last night, I tiptoed up to my daughter's room and heard her talking to someone. But when I opened the door, there was nobody there, only she on her knees, peeking into her own clasped hands. Mary Baraka. And I just love that energy of childhood imagination and hope that ends on what is really a sadness. And like, as a father of daughters, I think I connect to that even a little bit more. But I've never found them peeking into clasped hands. Instead, they're like staying up way too late, cutting up things and drawing and running around. And
Eric, I did tell you I actually met Marie Baraka.
You did not.
One of my
Really?
favorite things about this about sadly enough, our Greenwich Village tour is, of course, that most of the people who are on the tour are dead. But we actually had two writers who were alive, Marie Baraka and Pete Hamill, and both of them I have met and given our pub crawl card to, saying you should come on the pub crawl. Marie Baraka at the time, of course, was most definitely a little too frail to come on this, sadly. And Pete Hamill, of course, after I handed it, realized, oh, wait, part of the reason you're still alive is because you don't drink anymore.
Yeah, there is all that.
May not be the right thing for it, but yes,
Probably doesn't want to go back to the bar where he did most of his drinking to hear.
But yeah, I told Marie Baraka about our tour, so he knew about it.
Lisa, we are recording this. It is live, and I think it'll automatically be live up there. But our tours, we've been basically doing it on demand as we've been sort of trying to organically rebuild our new route, which we have now. And I think we're officially going to start. We're going to get a couple more guides back up. I got to get Marissa back down. I got to get Rachel back over. And then once I can convince the two of them to come back into New York City proper, we'll be running full steam.
I'll be right there.
Like an hour train ride for me, and then it's multiple planes for Rachel, which is about the same thing.
It's
Yeah,
about
there you go. Exactly. It's a quick
about a
flight.
13-hour drive. No problem.
You kept the day before, crash, do the tour, sleep, drive home. It's great.
Totally fine. Totally chill.
Popular weekend. And you can just like listen to recordings of our virtual tour so you can get up to speed on the drive.
There we go.
I think it's going to be perfect. Well, now I want to pass the mic, the screen, the laptop over to Marissa Levine, who has been, I think she basically pleaded to come on the tour to be a guide after she came on it the first time. And I think it was Pete Schuyler who was hoping to join us tonight, but unfortunately childcare is a real thing.
And Miranda was also on that particular tour where I begged and pleaded.
And the first tour that you did with us was like this really wacky private tour of 60 people at night. And it was like nothing that we'd ever done before. And we're all crammed back there. And I'm like, Marissa, this is doing nothing. And you're like, whatever, let's go for it. And I think I have 8 pictures of you from that tour. And every picture you're going, it's just like, are you taking a picture of me? Well, I'm going to ruin this one too. Like, okay, we know what Marissa's all about.
Yeah.
She did. I guess there is a really nice distinction with Marissa because she is one of our guides who is now a published author, which is very exciting, and we're all very, very thrilled. She does mention, and I think this is important, but she did mention in her bio that legitimately she wrote, the pinnacle achievement of her life has been working with a literary pub crawl where she's been a hanger-on since 2009. That is, I read that quote as from her, and of course I believe it. Having read some of her literature, it makes sense. Nah, I'm kidding. It's no, her book. I mean, it was get rave reviews in the New York Times. The World Gives Way. It was nominated for a Ray Bradbury Prize, one of the best sci-fi books of 2021 by the New York Times. And it's a wonderful read, and I do highly recommend it. It's a touching story about a talking pig who's trying to navigate her way through the world of strange farms and humans as she really finds her true passion as a juggler and joining a circus. And I think that there's really such a unique.
My primary influence was Orwell, yes.
Yeah.
It was like Animal Farm and Shel Silverstein combined, you know.
Exactly. But I think that's actually not the plot at all, obviously. But I do think that it's a really interesting detective story, and the clever use of a donut and a keychain as a murder weapon really blew my mind. I mean, again, I just can't. The creativity that went into telling a sci-fi story.
Spoilers.
I shall use my book to bang my head against something as you're doing this. Just
But she recommends, and I recommend, and I actually did buy 2 copies of this book because you don't want to like spill coffee or a drink on it or lose it partway through, because then you don't want to have to run to the store and miss that time. You're going to want to pick it up and read it all the way through. So get 2 copies, and then you can gift one of them away once you've read it. And actually, my mother-in-law enjoyed it so much that she's recommending it to her book club for their next book. So we are all proponents and really psyched and proud, and can't wait to see the next one that's going to come up. But you are also continuing, because you're gonna do 2 presentations for us, and you're also continuing the beat movement a bit here with us.
Yeah, I am. It's kind of a nice little bridge between Amiri Baraka and the beat movement and the poet that I'm going to talk about next here, who is Nikki Giovanni. Nikki Giovanni, I don't think she's as well known as some of the other poets of her day. I first discovered her kind of poem first. Basically, when I was a teenager, I happened to read an excerpt of one of her works in a poetry compilation. And I basically thought, I was like, yeah, that's pretty good. And it was good enough that I decided to go and look her up. And then upon looking her up, I realized that I'd stumbled onto a woman who was a foundational part of the Black arts movement. And she was a huge player in the civil rights movement as well. But she just isn't, she's not the first name you end up thinking of, but she's incredible. And she's been everywhere. She has seen everything, and she has met literally everyone. I really love Nikki Giovanni for this reason. If it's possible to bring up the next slide, there's a bunch of people that I want to shout out with this. So like, if you look here, there's Nikki Giovanni. Also, Miranda was mentioning the fact that we don't have a lot of poets and writers who are alive. Nikki Giovanni is alive, guys. It's very exciting.
Woo, don't jinx it.
What's that? Yeah.
I said, don't jinx it.
Yeah. Knock on wood as I say that. It's like,
women last longer. If you're a woman drinking, drink, go ahead. You're doing fine. If you're a man, I'm sorry.
Women can drink and be writers and live to a ripe old age. I'm certainly counting on that. I'm using that as a statistic for myself now. But yeah, anyways, so just going back through Nikki Giovanni's life and these slides that you have here, when I say that she's been everywhere, she's seen everything, and she's met everyone, I am not kidding. So you've got the slide in the top corner there where she's being hugged by Michelle Obama, and 2 over from that is Oprah, because Oprah has named her in various lists in O magazine, and she's dragged her onto her show and everything like that. Oprah loves Nikki Giovanni. Nikki Giovanni in the next picture over along the top there is also in the midst of doing a reading with 2 of her dear friends, Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison. And then my personal favorite is down at the bottom center. That's Nikki Giovanni in profile interviewing Muhammad Ali. This footage is online and you can find it, and it is very entertaining to watch, not only because she is just an aces amazing interviewer, but also Nikki Giovanni is quite small. I think you can tell when you're looking at her next to Michelle Obama there. So just picture teeny tiny Nikki Giovanni in her mid-20s interviewing Muhammad Ali. And what the size difference is there. It's an incredible interview just for the content alone, but also it is comical to me just to see the difference in size and scale between the 2 of them. And she's just in there, she's like, so, Mr. Ali, blah, blah, blah. He's like, well, and like their voices are entirely different. It's great. It's a fantastic interview. But anyways, I really love Nikki Giovanni for all those reasons, but also because she's a poet that has, over the course of her life, defied categorization. She's been called an Appalachian poet. She grew up in Ohio, and she taught for a number of years in Virginia at Virginia Tech as well. She's obviously been categorized many times over as a Black poet and as a woman poet. She's simultaneously referred to as a writer who's sort of a militant revolutionary, but also she's famous for being a writer of children's books. And she kind of can encompass all those things and let her writing speak to her complexity as a person. And obviously, for the purposes of this tour, I must also say that she definitely counts as a New York poet. Her first public poetry reading was at the legendary jazz club Birdland in Midtown. Beautiful spot. A lot of her poetry she has read aloud alongside to jazz. That's a big thing that she's done throughout her career. And she also originally came to New York because she received a grant to study poetry at Columbia at their MFA program. In the 70s, she was also a frequent collaborator on a TV variety program called Soul that had a focus on Black culture in the day. Soul televised a number of different interviews. That's where she did the interview for Muhammad Ali, for example. She was featured on there as an interviewer and as an interview subject many times, and she also collaborated in the writing rooms and acted as a producer at various points. But I think probably her most famous act working with Soul was that Soul televised what became a legendary conversation between her and James Baldwin. It was a 2-hour dialogue that plays as a very respectful argument between two different leaders of Black culture from two very different generations. At the time of the interview, Baldwin was 47 years old and Giovanni was only 28 years old, but she completely holds her own and she argues toe-to-toe with James Baldwin at various points throughout the interview, and she makes some really good points. It's also available. You can find it on PBS, you can find it online, and it is highly worth your time. The interview became so famous that they later published it in book form, as you can see here with the cover of the book there, and it was a pretty big hit. Unfortunately, I don't think it's in print now. The second that I found out that it was published, I immediately tried to go buy a copy, and then I was told by Amazon that it would cost me $500. So if you can please click donate so that we can all buy a copy of this book, that would be great. As time went on, she continued to be a New York poet for quite a while. She worked within Columbia for quite some time. She worked at Rutgers, and eventually she did find her way down to Virginia, and she was a teacher at Virginia Tech. And when she was there, she found herself at the center of quite a violent historical moment. To kind of fast forward to more recent historical events, she was a distinguished professor at Virginia Tech at the time of the tragic shooting that took place in 2007. Obviously, that left quite a huge stain on the students and on the faculty and on the country at large. And Giovanni, I think, was one of the big people out there that really helped to sort of start the healing process. She was the lead reader and sort of the eulogizer at the memorial service that was presented at Virginia Tech. And she led the memorial with a very, very, very moving speech that had people up on their feet by the end of it. Everyone shouting and chanting over and over again, "We are Virginia Tech, we are Virginia Tech." And she just did an incredible job at sort of creating a healing process for all of that as it went through. So all of that is incredibly uplifting and beautiful, but I don't want to end on a tragic note when it comes to the life of Nikki Giovanni. I think it would somehow be wrong for a woman as uplifting and amazing as she is. So instead, I'm going to close on one particular fun fact about Nikki Giovanni, which is that in 2004, biologists named a newly discovered Ecuadorian bat after Nikki Giovanni. There she is staring at her bat friend. Let me make sure I pronounce this correctly. I've already had just enough wine that Latin is difficult. Meet Micronycteris giovanniae, aka Giovanni's little night flyer in Latin. So if I can very, very horribly try and connect this to the poem that I'm about to read aloud from Nikki Giovanni, they both have some element of nature and nature's most scary but also cute species, in my particular opinion. One of my very, very favorite poems by Nikki Giovanni has to do with spiders. It's obviously a metaphor for something larger, and I love it and respect it both for the fact that it is a metaphor for something larger and because I'm a lifelong lover of spiders. So this poem here is called Allowables. I killed a spider, not a murderous brown recluse, nor even a black widow. And if the truth were told, this was only a small sort of papery spider who should have run when I picked up the book, but she didn't, and she scared me, and I smashed her. I don't think I'm allowed to kill something because I am frightened. Oh, there's a cute little spider.
I know, and it's killing me because I am an arachnophobe. So I struggle morally with the debate that's going on in this, much like Edward Gorey.
Even the tiniest, even the biggest arachnophobe, you have to admit that picture that Danielle found is an incredibly cute spider.
It is very adorable. With looking at the time here, I definitely want to kind of keep us moving along. I will admit I hadn't really heard of Nikki Giovanni before you kind of brought her onto this, and so I really appreciate you opening that up to me. And it was really lovely put together, despite the whole spider connection at the end. But it was a cute spider. I would not kill that spider. We don't kill spiders in my house either. But that was a great fit. But I would love you to move on to another one of your favorites. That you've hinted at before. I think we did this one other time before, but Elizabeth Bishop.
My girl, Elizabeth Bishop. She's amazing. Elizabeth Bishop is just a beautiful, beautiful, fantastic poet. There is like a mild connection that I can, sort of wrangle between her and Nikki Giovanni, which is that Elizabeth was writing in a time in the mid-20th century when poetry was really flourishing. And she was one of those poets that just knew everybody and she was connected to everybody. She also is sort of bridging that gap in that she was, writing and coming up in the mid-20th century, the 40s, the 50s, into the 60s. But at that point, she was getting a little older. And she was gay at a time when it was just possibly starting to be okay to be out, but also not. And that tug, push and pull really did sort of define her life and made it so that she had quite a number of battles with depression and had some real struggles out there. But again, I feel like I just have to say this at the outset, is that this tour is known for writers with tragic deaths, and Elizabeth Bishop is not still alive. She would be like 100 in a million right now if that were true. But she did live a long, happy life, and she ended her life well. And I just feel like I always have to toast to that whenever it happens to any of our poets on these tours. So just to give you a few fun literary locations in New York, partially so that you can go and find them at your will, and then also just so I can try and shove them into future tours. Elizabeth Bishop's first apartment in New York City, she was very much a New York poet as well as sort of a New England poet. She lived at 16 Charles Street. Mary McCarthy, the amazing author Mary McCarthy, helped her find that particular spot. And it was here that she wrote The Map, which was one of her first very famous poems. So New York for Bishop was definitely a place of loss. One of the other big locations that you can kind of go to if you are ever doing a literary pilgrimage for Elizabeth Bishop is the Chelsea Hotel. She stayed at the Chelsea Hotel for a decently long period of time, off and on. But one of the major events of her life, she was staying at the Chelsea Hotel when a former beau of hers, male, before she was out, he killed himself while she was staying at the Chelsea Hotel after she refused his marriage proposal. The man, a man named Bob Seaver, sent a postcard to the Chelsea that simply read, "Go to hell, Elizabeth." Later on, in later years in her life, one of her great loves of her life, a Brazilian designer named Laura de Macedo Soares, also killed herself while Elizabeth Bishop was visiting New York. So this seemed to be sort of an awful, tragic theme for her. As she told her very good friend, the amazing poet Robert Lowell, she said, "When you write my epitaph, you must say that I was the loneliest person who ever lived." Bishop wrote the poem that I'm going to read aloud, One Art, near the end of her life, after nearly committing suicide herself at the loss of another lover, Alice Methfessel. But happy ending. Alice did not kill herself like the other lovers that she lost. She just happened to leave. But Alice returned a few months later after this poem was written, and the two of them stayed together for the rest of their lives until Bishop's very peaceful death. So A+, we have a winner. She lived well. My last fun fact is that Mary McCarthy was her friend for a little while, but Mary McCarthy went ahead and based a lesbian character in her legendary book, The Group, on Elizabeth Bishop. If you've read the book, it's Eleanor Eastlake, aka Lakey. Bishop really did not appreciate being forcibly outed in this way, and it caused a permanent rift in their friendship. So don't forcibly out your friends in your works of thinly veiled fiction. Not good. Emily Post would say no to that one. Very impolite. But anyways, to sort of mark the ways in which Elizabeth Bishop, though she ended well, did have her share of losses in her life. I think one of her most eloquent poems ever is this poem, One Art, which goes a little something like this. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last, or next to last, of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture, I love. I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master. Though it may look like, write it like disaster.
Nice. Very nice. Love the story. And again, that's another one that I really love that he introduced to. And the group is on my list. I was going to read the group, but I started reading The World Gives Way instead. So I prioritized accordingly.
Buy 5 copies. It's the best thing to give to friends.
That's the gift that keeps on giving back to you. No, that's great. And very well done. And it's a beautiful poem. There's some really nice, lovely stuff here. And I think what I like with Rachel, who is our Londoner, our friend from overseas, who is coming to us all the way from Tennessee.
That's right.
Which is great.
Surprise.
Former guide for a long time. And it's funny because I met Rachel. We were doing a production of Romeo and Juliet. Which I was questioning how well it would turn out. It's actually a lot of fun to work on. Got a little silly, I have to say, at times. Yeah. But I was talking to somebody else because Pete Schuyler was also in that same production, and I was talking to one of the other actors who had mentioned something about like history and literature, and I started talking about this particular tour that was going on, and Rachel's kind of like walking around the dressing room, and be like, you should ask me. What was that? Did you say a tour, Thai history, literature?
You need guides,
right? And just ended up becoming like a real favorite for everyone. And it was a loss when she decided that she needed to, I guess, think about her own life versus the good of the tour. But some of us have to make those kind of choices. But she's a terrific actress, and she was a terrific guide. And she's also a terrific musician, and she had her own band, Coyote Love, for a while in New York. And I think you're talking about getting the band back together, or at least going on to some new musical adventures.
Yeah. By the way, you can find us on all good musical platforms. We have 2 albums. But yeah, I played with that band for a long time, and so we're figuring out how to keep making music together, and maybe that's just every so often. I did fly up to New York last year for one weekend just so we could play a reunion gig together, and it was 100% worth it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I love just how like the myriad of talents that our group has, and the people that we bring on this. It really is a great reflection of just how talented people can be in the world. But you picked a somewhat talented poet as well, and one I love the fact that, again, it's somebody else that I wasn't that familiar with, and I love just how fitting she is for our Greenwich Village tour.
Yeah, and that was, again, just a kind of weird, I don't know, I don't believe in coincidences, but sometimes the universe makes things line up. And yeah, there's lovely synchronicity with some of the people that we've talked about on the literary pub crawl, and even some of the other, people here. There's some interesting thematic connections, which is cool. So I'm actually going to talk about a recently treasured poet for me, Mary Oliver. So Mary was praised as, quote, an indefatigable guide to the natural world. And so Mary focused her writing not on large events in the US or in the world, but on the profundity of the natural world and its ability to provoke deep introspection and insight. And she was a prolific writer. She published over 15 essay and poetry collections. And she's actually regarded as one of the nation's best-selling poets. And she has this really simple, straightforward style of writing. And so it makes her words very accessible to anyone, but she also manages to be kind of stop you in your tracks moving at the same time. But Mary was actually not taken that seriously by the literary world in a lot of her life. It's kind of remarkable that none of her works have ever received a full-length review in the New York Times, which is a kind of amazing absence given her body of work and her enduring appeal. And sometimes that's attributed to the fact that she didn't write about these kind of heady intellectual literary topics, but instead, and I found this quote online and I loved it, but someone said that instead she wrote about, quote, old-fashioned subjects, nature, beauty, and worst of all, God. And so some have sort of commented there was a bit of a sexism to that criticism. She's sometimes been referred to as having throw pillow poetry, which I think is absolutely a horrible thing to say.
But what a great line, though. I do like that as a throw pillow poetry. I mean, it's kind of a great, it's very Shakespearean insult.
It's true. It's like just because your poems are on Pinterest doesn't mean that they're not meaningful. So yeah, for me, that's a really kind of lazy dismissal of someone who was actually really profoundly connected to the sacred, whether you call that God, the universe, whatever. But she was really profoundly connected to it through her love of nature and the earth. And she drew on that connection to find truths about the mysteries of life through her writing. So she was born in 1935 in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. And she was a child who often retreated into nature to, escape other challenges, in her home life, sometimes growing up. And so she always wrote as a way of expressing herself. But she was also deeply influenced by Edna St. Vincent Millay, who is a beloved poet of me personally, but also on the Greenwich Village Literary Pub Crawl. So shameless plug, go on the tour. It's fantastic. One of my favorite poets, actresses, everything. She's wonderful. So the story goes that while Mary Oliver was in high school, she wrote to Millay's sister Norma asking if she could visit the poet's home, which is called Steepletop, and it's in Austerlitz, New York. And so apparently she left her native Ohio for New York the day after she graduated high school in 1953 and headed to Steepletop. And she actually ended up living there for several years and assisted Norma in organizing Millay's papers. And while she was living there in the late 1950s, she met Mary Malone Cook, who's in this picture. Mary Oliver said, quote, "I took one look and fell, hook and tumble," which I love. And much of her work was dedicated to Molly. And so Cook also became Mary's literary agent, and the two of them located to the beautiful Provincetown, Massachusetts, where Mary spent most of the rest of her life. And Molly Malone Cook died in 2005. And Mary died in 2019 at the age of 83. So here's to more happy love stories that lasted for many, many years. I love that.
Cheers.
So much of her writing draws on observations from many of those kind of meditative walks that she took on Cape Cod, and her musings on our relationship to nature, to life, to death. And Mary said she fancied herself, quote, "the kind of old-fashioned poet who walks the woods most days, accompanied by dog and notepad." And that was from a 2017 profile. And she also said, "When things are going well, the walk doesn't get rapid or get anywhere. I finally just stop and write. That's a successful walk." And once, apparently, after she found herself in the woods without anything to write on, she started hiding pencils in the trees along her regular route so that she'd never end up in that predicament again, which I love. And so to me, Mary's ethos and poetry is kind of key to her enduring influence and why she's so special to me personally. She believed that poetry shouldn't be exclusive, like we've been saying. It should be accessible to everyone. And her own words actually express this better than I can describe. So I want to share this quote. She said about poetry once and writing, "It doesn't have to be blue iris. It can be weeds in a vacant lot. Just pay attention, Then patch a few words together and don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but the doorway into thanks, a silence in which another voice may speak. And I just think that's a beautiful way to describe poetry.
Quote.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I love it. So really, for me, I turn to Mary's poetry, and actually her collected essays, Upstream, is incredible if you want to read some prose. It's really a reminder of what's truly meaningful and special about our world. And so for me, when our sort of modern human culture feels very divisive, very polarized, and quite disempowering to me as an individual, I find a lot of solace and encouragement in her kind of gentle invocation to go back to nature and to go back to introspection. And one of her poems, that's called The Journey, actually hangs framed in the reception office of my therapist's office here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I live. And I'm going to read it, and you'll probably see why it hangs in the office of the therapist. And it was published in 1964 in that collection, No Voyage and Other Poems. But to me, it's just as timely and prescient as when she wrote it almost 60 years ago. So this is The Journey. One day, you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voice behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life that you could save. Mary Oliver.
Very nice. Very, very nice. And I wanted to ask, because I know you mentioned something yesterday, and I think it's kind of appropriate given how we've talked about where where our, whatever opinions of poetry is kind of going on. When you talked about your hesitancy of picking Mary Oliver.
Yeah, because I've discovered her really only in the last couple of years. And I didn't know much about her, and I just read one of her poems and was just incredibly moved by it. And so I bought American Primitive, she won the Pulitzer Prize for that poetry collection. And I bought Upstream and read them, and they just spoke to me very deeply. And then I started kind of researching her and realized that apparently she's super commercially successful and well-read, and she's got, quotes are all over the internet, sort of inspiring quotes and that kind of stuff. So I was like, oh, it was a sort of hesitancy of like, oh, maybe she isn't like literary enough to be in this, kind of poetry event. But actually, the more I read about how she felt about poetry, and the more we've all talked about how the point of something like this is to make it accessible again to people and to not make it mysterious or snobbish, the more I'm like, oh, she's an amazing example of how poetry can be for everyone. And it can speak to everyone. And also that poetry is unique in that what I love about poetry isn't going to be the same as what somebody else loves. So you got to go and like find your own thing. But I think there's a poem for everyone.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I hit a point where, when I started really doing the tour and running it and said, like, I want to go in, like, I wanted to have read everyone I talked about. Mm-hmm. At least something, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to just like regurgitate what other people, I wanted to have an opinion because I read the novel and this is what my experience was and what I learned and gained from it. But there was definitely a huge chunk of time where I was reading dead authors. 50, 60, 80 years ago. And I was feeling like I was really out of touch on what was kind of going on in the modern world. And that's why I've loved, these that we've been doing, is because it's opening up other people, introducing, just like what you used to do with music. Mm-hmm. And sharing an album and sharing a track and like sharing artists and inspiring other people. And I think like one of the ones I'd come across, actually, I have it right here, is Sharon Olds, because I started going through the Pulitzer Prize winning, and she won the Pulitzer Prize for Stag's Leap, which is a wonderful collection. But I remember as I read it, it was like, it made me not ever want to divorce my wife, because I really could connect with what she went through and her experience. And it was so personal with like, and so eloquent with what she went through and how she refound things. And I feel like because, I'm not a divorced woman yet, and may never be likely. It was connecting through a sense of empathy for the artist, not with with that same kind of inspiration. Whereas like what you just read with Mary Oliver, kind of has it, like you said, it's accessible for more. I'm not trying to make a comparison of a better or worse there, but it was just one of those sort of experiences where it's nice to have some of those that anybody can like, oh, that makes me want to, like, Sharon makes me want to be a good husband. Mary Oliver is, making me kind of want to really, again, like look at the world in a slightly different way. And I think there's value in all of that. But with that, thank you. This was, the four of you were fantastic and some really good stuff. Like I said, like I got new poets that I'm going to read because of what you kind of brought to this and putting this together. And it means a lot to me that all of you would take some of the time to put this in. The tour obviously means a lot to me. And we've all, as everything kind of changed, we all got busy, and families and work and health insurance and mortgages and all these things kind of come into play. And it's been hard. And there was a period of time where it's like, maybe this is a sign, maybe it's time to stop doing the tours. It gets hard to, when Danielle and Justin and I, and then, Becca and Rose, we can only meet in the evenings because everyone's busy working, and the evenings is a little bit of time with my kids and my wife, or downtime. And it gets exhausting. And when we actually do something like this, it's reinvigorating. And so you continue to reinvigorate me, to not want to let this go, because it has been a passion project. So I do appreciate you all contributing to this today, and I appreciate the folks that joined on and stayed on the whole time. We ran a little bit longer than normal, and you're with us. And there's a lot of names that I recognize there, and it means a lot to me that you have that continued support for us and for what this is, because this is, like I said, we're certainly not paying any of those mortgages, or my kids' college is not getting paid off of something like this, but it is a shared passion. And so when we can connect with people who have that shared passion, and I hope that you do enjoy it, and please, if you did, direct it to other folks and friends that you think might enjoy it. And hopefully we'll start doing these a little bit more regularly again. I did want to end, and I think it's sort of appropriate, because one of the new authors that we talk about with our new bar, there was a question that was just asked about her as well. And she's one of the ones that we're starting to feature more on our tour. And that's one of the more recent poet laureates, Ada Limon. And she wrote a poem about the bar that is now our starting bar at the Four-Faced Liar, before she became the 24th poet laureate. And it begins with the trees. And she writes, "Two full cypress trees in the clearing intertwine in a way that almost makes them seem like one, until a certain angle from the bright blue blow-up pool I bought this summer to save my life, I see it not one tree, but two, and they are kissing. They are kissing so tenderly it feels rude to watch, one hand on the other's shoulders, another in the other's branches, like hair. When did the kissing become so dangerous? Or was it always so? That illicit kiss in the bathroom of the Four-Faced Liar, a bar named after a clock, what was her name? Or the first one with you on the corner of Metropolitan Avenue before you came home with me forever? I watch those green trees now, and it feels libidinous. I want them to go on kissing without fear. I want to watch them and not feel so abandoned by hands. Come home. Everything is begging you." Ada Limon. So to partially answer your question, I know Marissa really wanted to kind of jump in with more of an answer, but it is interesting. I would like to kind of hear what other folks have thought about her. I know it was pretty neat with her getting selected as the poet laureate, and we were excited that we were able to actually start having more living current writers on our tour. And that's one of the reasons why I was saying at the beginning of this, like, we're really excited about the next stage of our in-person tour, is the fact that we're featuring writers that are happening now, and the places that they were getting their inspiration from really early on. But Marissa, I know you were dying to field a little bit of that Ada Limon. What did you want to say?
Just that I really, really adore Ada Limon. And I do think that she's probably one of the poets now that, I'm like teaching literature on the side. I've got a bunch of college students that are, kind of coming up. And she's one of the names that they will like very readily be able to reference before I start shoving my poetry preferences at anybody. And so I do think that she's like leading the charge a bit more towards us having really recognizable populist, if you will, poets again, like poets that everybody actually like knows and works with and stuff like that. I do think Mary Oliver is definitely in that camp as well, based on like, you know, Rachel, what you were talking about with like internet poems and like the way in which somebody might not take a poet seriously, but also that's totally the way in which everybody is, you know, communicating about poets these days. I've seen Mary Oliver memes, the number of times that somebody will take like a weird meme picture and then just put in like the opening lines of Wild Geese or something.
Yeah.
Like pictures of like Stewie from Family Guy with a speech bubble that says you do not have to be good. It's great.
I might have to find that on Etsy and order
Yeah.
it to add to my
If
office.
I find one of them, I'm going to send it your way for sure. But like,
Please do.
and that might be a way to dumb it down, but it's also a way in which like people are treating these poets as rock stars in their own new ways. And I definitely think Edelmohn's in that camp, and she's just like lovely and wonderful and makes you love the world a little bit more. I can't quote anything from her like readily, but just her stuff is amazing. So,
And it's kind of cool that because yeah, I think for me, and trying to the soapbox with this, but like as a member of Gen X, we're often forgotten about. And the number of times we see all of these lists of like, you know, the lost generation, the boomer generation, the millennials and Gen Zs, and like all of these lists, and no one mentions us and no one kind of talks about us. And, you know, there has been some talk, like it's possible that Generation X will never have a president. You know, it's possible that it will go from boomers to millennials. That's a real, you know what I mean? Like we were kind of in that, in the middle. So whenever there is an artist or an icon or somebody of the Gen Z, I mean, Generation X, it's kind of exciting. And she is within that realm. So, you know, power to us. We are contributing. We may not just be loud about it.
Also, I can get into a whole side tangent about how Gen X is actually one of the smallest generations. Between boomers and millennials, it's actually a really small number of people. So that's part of it. I'm a Gen X cusp millennial, and I despise it when people call me a millennial. So
The millennial one just like seemed to expand as they were like,
yeah, millennials just kept going. As a millennial that grew up in the Pacific Northwest, go to Seattle if you want everyone to revere Gen X. Like that was all.
Yeah. Yep.
Everything.
Very true.
That was the moment. Yeah, that is, you know, and it is something, and this is something I thought about from a literary point of view as well, as when you think of some of the great movements, so much of it was a little bit of a rebelliousness against some things that weren't right, things, you know, the frustrations or feeling overpowered by, you know, like your parents' generations or other generations, or values that were being forced upon you that just didn't fit in the world that you were seeing anymore. And you know, for me, and I think again, to your point, you know, grunge music was really that breakaway of we're tired of this. We're tired of like, we have a different way of saying and expressing ourselves. And I've often wondered, because in my mind, I haven't seen that happen since really. Hip hop might be the other, you know, the real other movement that kind of broke away from a lot of the strands. But from like a literary point of view, like with the beat movement and whatnot, like I haven't felt that I've seen it. And I've wondered, is it because it's not happened, and you know, there are more people who are comfortable. We're you know, a quick attention getting with phones and TVs, and like everything is so kind of easy to get to. And when we are pursuing the arts, it's so much about the fame and the money, and not so much about this need to get the stuff out. Or am I not connected to the art and the music that is changing? You know what I mean? But like from what I've seen, it's really like hip hop and grunge in my worldview were the last real breakouts. And I'm trying to think of like from a literary point of view, if there's been like a group or a movement, you know, I mean, obviously there are trends and there are styles, but where are all the people who are being like, screw this thing, I want to live, screw what you're telling me I should do, screw, you know, like that real just anger of like, I'm not just going to pursue what everyone's telling me I need to pursue to be famous and watch Netflix and use the phone. And, you know, like I feel like that's lost. And I worry sometimes, like, is there going to be a generation to say, wait a minute, there's more to life than this thing, and there's more to life than this, and you know, like,
I'd say that looking at what I know of, I think interestingly enough, a little bit younger is, you know, again, I'm thinking about the children's sort of section and all of that. Is there's this weird section of dystopian children's work that really was like we're a little bit older than that, but like that's that world of the people who grew up in dystopian children's and were like, no, I don't trust the world. I don't trust that my generation will have a wonderful life. I don't trust that, Hunger Games is not going to happen. Like, I need to fight back to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's what makes me actually sort of hopeful for the next generation in some ways. I think they have some of that, like, sort of, sadly enough, fear and non-trust that might be able to create a new movement, and create that. In terms of poetry, like, I don't see in children's books, you get a lot of sort of things, picture books that have that sort of rhyme and movement, but you don't have that same sort of spoken specific poetry the way that I've seen from like Shel Silverstein's and other sort of back in that, even like going back to Edward Lear style poems, and all the inspirations of that. It's not as common to go back to poetry. It's sort of been spread out in a different way.
I think these things also have cycles, and certainly I think an art form like poetry, it has these times when it becomes really powerful for a period in time, for a movement, for something that's sort of happening. It's like a response to the world. And I also think, thinking about like Ada Limon, that she's now somebody that people recognize or like know who she is, again, more like in the zeitgeist. It's an interesting time to think about why people might be turning back to poetry and be looking for that kind of, I don't know what you want to call it. Sometimes it's inspiration, sometimes it's a way of being provoked to think differently about the world. So I do think that I feel like we're at this kind of interesting turning point with sort of 20 to 30 years of the internet and social media, and we've hit this kind of peak, and everyone's now like, maybe there's a slower way to kind of process the world. And I think people then start, for me personally as well, I've really turned back more to, reading. I like reading physical books. I don't like reading electronic books. I just can't do it. I need like a book in my hand. And it's the same with poetry. I have to read it in my hands. And I do think that it'll be interesting to see over the next 10 years, like whether that continues to be more of a trend of people saying, you know what, there's a time and a place for the amazing connection that we can have through our kind of globalized world and through the internet. But there's this huge value in the intimate and the personal of reading a book or reading a poem. So yeah, I think it's interesting times, and I'm curious to see like where it goes.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times it's almost like a subcultural movement. And if you like, I try to think of the things that were inspiring me and getting me in the art and the reading and the stuff that was getting me to think the world in a different way was very reactionary to the status quo. And sometimes it's because the status quo, I think it goes back to like, why are there so many writers that are like alcoholics and depressed and all these other things? And I always like to make the comparison of like, if I were to go through my stacks of journals, can't call them a diary because of my masculinity, but what I have written down there, it's not toxic, but it's fragile. But when I look at what like who opens up their journal or diary and says, today's great, I'm so satisfied with my life, let me expound on that. I mean, that's rarer and takes a little bit more effort than when you're not feeling happy, that pain, that struggle, that not lack of inclusion. You need to get those, you don't want those emotions, you need to get them out. And so that's where a lot of artistic expressions, and it is a little cliche, but true, that sometimes the struggle is what makes the art. And I think that there's a lot of, there's less struggle, I think, for some of the generations. And that's why we're seeing those who are starting to see their voices getting told a little bit more. And I think that's where I'm wondering, like, I guess maybe it's just my own view of the world, is I want to see the social media. I want to see the young people reacting against that and not getting into the TikToks more. And maybe it's, me being Gen X about it, but like, what's the conversation between you and me in front of us? And I'm guilty. I'm on this thing a lot, but like, where are the people saying like the status quo and everything you're telling me we're supposed to do to be successful, get on, throw out the content, do all these other things. Like, what is the real again?
I'll tell you, just personally, as a person that went through the publishing machine, like the sheer amount of people that tell you that it's really required that you go on Twitter and have a presence in order to get any money.
Yeah.
It's big. So like, I think publicity is a factor now in the way that books are produced not to say that it wasn't a factor before, but I think it's just a little bit different. That like basically like the second that you're even trying to find an agent to get a book deal, which is something that like all of them had to deal with. Like F. Scott had to go find an agent and an editor and stuff. It was like just a very different world. But now to do that, like you'll have people asking you the question, well, how many followers do you have? And I know this as a person who has very few Twitter followers. And then like watching, you know, like fellow writers and authors who like make their web presence huge because that's like part of the machine in order to get the message out for their books that are incredibly good. It's not like these are people that are insanely corporate. These are people that are like teaching in your universities that are like really trying to do things to push the boundaries of what prose is, all this stuff. Like they're incredibly good writers out there. And it's like about a generation ago, I'd say like about Gen X ago was the last time that it was okay to be a mainstream author, at least a mainstream living author, because you could maybe just be a dead genius that somebody finds later. And not have some sort of public presence. Because I've like actually just sighed and mentioned to my loved ones that what I would really like to do as a creative person, and I don't know, Rachel or Miranda or any of the rest of you, like how you feel in your own creative endeavors. I don't even want to become especially famous. I just want to be just famous enough to have some sort of cult status while being seen as eccentric for not being on social media, the way that like Don DeLillo is, or that like Thomas Pynchon, nobody knows what his face is, and he goes on The Simpsons with a paper bag and a question mark over his head, you know, like
I
I want
learned that my feeling of what I want to be famous on has actually changed recently, where a musician friend of mine was playing in the pit for Hadestown. And you know, generally pit orchestras, no one really pays attention to the pit orchestra, even for a Broadway show. But he gets to be seen sort of, you know, it's one of those shows where they see them on stage. Someone had their family dress up as characters from Hadestown and included one of the people dressed up as him. And I realized that is what I want in my life. Like I want someone to have dressed up as me for Halloween for no reason, just be and like have no knowledge of who I am.
In that culty way, in that like cult famous thing.
Exactly. Like that needs to, you know, they don't need to know who I am or anything. They just, you know, for some reason decided to dress up as me or a character I've made or something like that. You know, that is my wish some point in my famousness. I will probably.
I really wish you'd been out here for Halloween, because I dressed up as you last Halloween as we were going around the neighborhood here, and I didn't get any good pictures, but I was just like, who inspires me? And I said Miranda, and it was
dress up as you for
Halloween. It was all black and white, you know what I mean? I had to, you know, there was the whole deal. But
Well, as someone who completely retired from social media about 2 years ago, and my mental health has thanked me every day since. Yeah, that was a big piece of deciding that trying to pursue a career as an actor and a musician professionally, I realized it's like I'm good to enjoy art for art's sake and find my kind of new happy medium. I gave it a really good shot for 16 years in New York and had the best time and have no regrets about it. But there was a point at which my brain said, this isn't good for you. Kind of to your point, Eric. It was like suddenly the universe said very loudly, like, don't do this anymore. And I'm glad I listened. And so now I'm kind of starting back again of what does artistic pursuit look like now when there's no external pressure that I have to kind of announce it to anybody. It's actually about being a musician and being an actor in a way that's quite private. And that's a whole new way of thinking about, especially being a performer. And it's a really interesting thing to kind of navigate. But also, you know, moving to a really small city like Chattanooga, there's a really beautiful arts, creative music, theater scene here that like no one in New York gives a crap about, and that's fine. And I'm really happy with that, you know, and I'm really happy to kind of find that new community here and it really be about creating it for the like local community. And that's all it needs to be, and that's enough. And I think for me, that was a really big kind of evolution after feeling like you're saying, Marissa, well, if I want to do this, then I have to like follow these steps and do all these things that are really prescriptive and actually aren't genuine or authentic for me as a person. And it took, I don't know, turning 40 to figure that out. So I was a bit of a slow learner, but I got there eventually.
Well, it sounds like your life is pretty magical. And having recently visited Chattanooga for the first time, I can say that you pretty much are just living the dream right now.
It's pretty nice. Bitch, don't tell anyone. Don't.
Yeah, keep it a secret.
Yeah, you heard
Yeah.
that.
We're good. Everyone here's great. You guys can all come. You're cool. You're in. But
Nice small group. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Maureen, for the kind words. It does mean a lot to hear that. Thank you all for contributing. If you want, you can go to our website. If you're not on our mailing list, you can go up to our website and sign our mailing list. There are links if you want to tip the guides through PayPal and Venmo. You can do that through our website of literarypubcrawl.com and our YouTube channel, which is at Lit Pub Crawl. We are also at Lit Pub Crawl on Facebook and Twitter, and what's the other one? Instagram. Hopefully, now that Danielle's back and some other people, because I'm also pretty much off social media. My mental health has appreciated that a little bit better as well. But we're trying to get our presence back up there. And you can follow our YouTube channel. I think this automatically records up there. So if you miss part of it, you can go back to it and see some of our previous ones. We have a lot of fun ones up there, whether it's partnerships with Village Preservation Society or just ones that we've done on our own. I think there's a few we might need to re-add up there. But you can kind of get a sense of the style of what we do. But thank you all so very, very much. Good luck. Keep reading. Thank you for getting lit with us. We are in this together, and can't wait to see you all in person at some point soon.
thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Trying to hit the end button, but I keep missing it with my finger. So it's like that awkward goodbye that kind of happens. Like who's the last one?